as we're in about 17 locations now, obviously you can imagine sort of one program doesn't fit as it would in Southern Africa versus Southeast Asia. So there's a fair bit of contextualization, but to give it, I guess the four pillars of what we do is global campaigns, so to reach people around the world, various ways of reaching them through sporting events, campaigns in airports and transportation, in schools, etc. We run hotlines around the world. Hotlines are very important because they procure the information that we need to be able to do the triage for intervention. And then we also run a forensics facility, mainly in Southeast Asia for children, called the CAC, which is about collecting a really robust witness statement so that the accused can be sentenced correctly. And of course, the care and the holistic care that's required for that child thereafter. And in addition to that, in our aftercare piece, we run something that we've coined the phrase a freedom center. In many cases, over the years, we've realized that institutionalized care doesn't really work as well as having the focus of giving someone independence. And so a freedom center really exists in close proximity to where a victim may be residing. And sometimes we prepare places for them to live with their children. It'll be foster care. If they're adults, we would rent them a place of their own. And then they come to the Freedom Center to learn new skills, sometimes very basic skills. And then also just really to get them back on the path of independence and to give them their life back holistically again.
Got it. Hey, Christian, let me ask you a quick question. Just a side note, Forensic Center, can you just share for a minute what a Forensic Center is? Is it just merely collecting witnesses, or what else do you guys do in this Forensic Center?
Well, I mean, it's sort of filling a gap where, I think it's important to say, partnerships are very important in everywhere we work. But it goes back to, previously in Thailand, there weren't really many convictions when it came to child trafficking. And that was mainly down to the fact that the witness statements were usually incorrect, or that they were, children, they don't necessarily remember things in perfect uniformity. They need special care, and they need specially trained forensic social workers to be able to take them through a process. Very, very often, we experience this in Southeast Asia. And one of the reasons why we set up the CAC is because quite often rookie police officers are involved in collecting the witness statement and pulling it together. And quite often, because human trafficking was not necessarily given the priority it should, you'd have multiple police officers, dipping in to get information. And of course, if you say the car's yellow 1 minute, for example, but then you say the car's red, it's enough to get the whole thing thrown out of court, even innocuous things like the car is red, the car is yellow. So when we say forensics, we really mean properly obtaining the witness statement that can be corroborated for the prosecutor. And of course, there are other areas that we would get involved into, so the physicality of the child, particularly if they've been harmed in any way. We will bring professionals in to do that. It's very much a collaboration with other organizations for those kind of forensics, but we'll collect all of that information. The CAC as a model works in collaboration with what we call ICAC, which is the Internet Crimes Against Children. So a traditional CAC model is that you would have a home, or a facility rather, and in part of the facility you would have the professionals, which we call ICAC, as I just mentioned, who would disseminate the information, and they would be on hand for specific cases. And then the other part would be the holistic care for the child. There'd be the interview room, which is very important. We don't want to have to ask questions over and over again. So we have technology in the interview room, we'll have cameras, we'll have audio, but we make it as comfortable for the child as possible, as well as listing and identified all of the holistic care that child will need.
You got it. Bethany, I'm going to loop you in as well, too. And you and I have gotten to know each other for many years now. Share a little bit about your story, whether it's with IJM and formerly with the State Department.
Yeah, so I started working on the issue of human trafficking really when I was in graduate school, about 2002, February 2002. I had no idea that it existed until I saw a poster that a woman from the Salvation Army had put up in a hallway in my graduate school cafeteria. And it was just, it took me aback, and I put my name down on the mailing list and asked her, what is this? What do I do? And I just started to receive information. I was thinking little by little, but it was actually more like a flood. It felt like a flood of information in my inbox. And I remember I would go to the computer lab each day to check my email. This is, early 2002, so there wasn't a lot of internet in our dorms or other places. And so I'd go to the computer lab, log in, and I'd get this flood of new information from this woman, just collecting stories from all around the world of people who are being bought and sold. Women, little girls, boys, families taken into labor trafficking. And I just remember hanging my head in my hands, just not knowing what I could possibly do and wondering, how can this be real? How did I never know about this before? How can there be so many cases of this happening around the world? And I'm only at the age of, 23 back then, just now finding out about this. And it's completely overwhelming. And it's really some of the darkest things I had ever heard or seen in my life. So my first encounter with human trafficking was, it grabbed a hold of my imagination. I knew I wanted to do something, but I also felt completely paralyzed. I just felt like there was nothing I possibly could do. But that flood of information really started to help guide me and helped me realize that this was something I wanted to know what to do about. And it really came through a connection with others. I learned that when you start to connect with other people who are willing to also learn and to acknowledge what they don't know, but figure out together how to know more and how to move forward and how to take action, things start to change. And so for me, it started by beginning to work with an organization called International Justice Mission. And along the way, actually through my work with IJM, I met a woman named Christine Kane. And she, when I met her, was in the early stages of founding this organization called the A21 campaign. And that connection with her really became a really significant encouragement to me to want to stay in this fight over the long haul, to realize that, we're going to take on a really giant evil in the world. There's I can't think of any, the darkness of trafficking can't be over dramatized. It cannot be, it can't be, it can honestly be really crushing. And there have been so many times over the years where when you really start to understand what trafficking is, you want to figure out something else to work on instead. And it's friendships, particularly like that with Christine Kane, and watching what she's done to mobilize A21 into the world, that has shown me that when we are connected with others, we can move forward, and when we actually need to be in this over the long haul, because traffickers are they're really innovative. They're using things like the COVID-19 pandemic to profit even more from trafficking. And they're going to figure out how to stay in this over the long haul, how to keep profiting as much as they possibly can over the purchase of human beings and using them as commodities and using them over and over and over and over again until they just discard them. So traffickers are committed, and I want to see us be at least as committed, all the more committed. But we need to do it in community together. So IJM in the earlier days, getting to know A21, I continued in this work with IJM for nearly 15 years. And then I went to work for the United States Department of State. And the US Department of State has an office to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. And it's the highest federal authority in the United States in regard to human trafficking, and the United States engagement with every country in the world in regard to what they're doing to fight human trafficking. And I served for a while with the State Department, and it was just incredibly eye-opening to get a view into this issue truly from a global perspective, and to see just how much progress actually has been made. The United States opened this office at the State Department in 2000. So really this issue is new for on the world stage as a whole, including for our own country. But we've had 20 years now in this movement, and there's been an incredible amount of progress. But at the same time, we're at the beginning. This is still the very beginning, and there's a lot ahead of us. And I'm really excited about the possibilities ahead, especially after this season of having worked with the State Department and seeing what's been done and what's left to do, but also seeing just the incredible organizations that have risen up and have dedicated themselves to being in this fight for the long haul.
Thank you, Bethany. Christian, let me bring you into the conversation. Share a little bit about your journey in this fight against trafficking, and also a little bit tie in with the Can You See Me campaign that you started as well, too.
Yeah, sure. Well, the short story is, I mean, a bit like Bethany, I was just horrified with the things that I discovered, knowing that nobody really knew about this. And that was back in 2004, 2005, which led me to work with some great people to start an organization. Sorry, not an organization, a campaign called Stop the Traffic. And that kind of, I knew nothing about it. I mean, I just knew that I needed to do something. And I sort of, speaking about trafficking was like speaking into an echo chamber, because it just really just people didn't believe it to be true, and it was, we're talking staggering amounts of people. And I was just horrified. How could people not know about this? And so, that campaign was amazing, in that we got, pre-Facebook, which is, I think, is really impressive, a couple of million signatures. It put trafficking on some kind of agenda within the UN and within the British government as well, which meant that more priority was given to it. It was given a bit of a platform, and that was on the 200th, the bicentenary of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, which was spearheaded by Wilberforce. So there was quite a lot of, a lot of news about it, and so we were able to sort of piggyback off the back of that. And then when that all settled down, I sort of felt, well, I really need to understand what the mechanics of this are. And so I started my own little agency. We did some missions. Actually, I was doing some work in Burma, in particular with the Shan state and different things, and working with the Thai government. And went on to do a little stint with Love 146, a great guys, great allies of ours, and then A21. So, I mean, it's just been a tremendous kind of journey of just seeing milestone after milestone combated, where, in the early stages, we just thought, well, how the heck are we going to make a dent in this? How are we going to do anything of any use? But yeah, it's a long old story, but that's the basics of it. Totally.
Got it. Christian, let me, I'm going to follow up with Bethany on this, but let me ask you a follow-up question for you is, when we think of trafficking, a lot of people think of sexual trafficking, everything like that. The term human trafficking involves a lot more. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that involves in the whole idea of human trafficking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's most people will think of human trafficking as sex trafficking, or someone who's being, forced into prostitution. And, it's still one of the largest forms of trafficking. But really, it's a way in which somebody has been either coerced or forced to do something against their will. And that could include sex trafficking. It could include labor trafficking. It could be domestic servitude. It could be online enticement. In fact, there are many different categories of trafficking. But the main ones are labor trafficking, sex trafficking, domestic servitude, online enticement, so they take on many forms. Many of the approaches that traffickers use are similar in that it usually involves coercing a person. It usually involves them being lured into something that they think is one thing, and then when they're within the situation where they are now powerless, are forced to do something that is against their will. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the basic definition is there.
Yeah. And for some of you guys who are new to this conversation, is our mutual friend, Christian and Bethany and mine, is Bill Clark. And Bill invited me on a trip to Asia, brought some of our folks from Jakarta to join me. And we met in Thailand and Cambodia. And the one thing that really struck me, because I have a 1-year-old daughter, I have a 6-year-old daughter, is the very fact that in Thailand, they sell their babies, that they pass those babies around, drug the baby, and then they beg for money using the baby as bait. And that really captivated me, because I'm sitting there, how in the world does someone allow that to happen just because I have a 1-year-old daughter at home or a 6-year-old daughter? Yeah. So, hey, Bethany, you mentioned in your introduction that progress has been made. Talk a little bit about some of that progress that you've seen.
Yeah, and actually I was going to piggyback on what Christian was talking about for a minute too with the definitions, just to throw out some numbers. Statistics can be really unhelpful because they're nebulous, but they're also, they're still important. And so I'll throw out one, and that's that the current estimate right now is that there are about 24.9 million people who are victims of human trafficking in the world. And that comes from the International Labor Organization. And just to piggyback on what Christian was saying, to break that down, there are over 16 million out of that 24.9 who are victims of labor trafficking specifically. So this is forced labor. You can have anything from individuals, children, like what you were just talking about, Tommy, with forced child begging. You can have entire families that are in servitude to a slave master for labor. And that's the largest category of human trafficking victims. But like Christian said, often a lot of times what we think of when we think of human trafficking is sex trafficking. And it's a little bit over 4 million people in the world are victims of sex trafficking. And certainly we think of women and girls. It also affects boys. And it's when bodies are really, truly, just like with forced labor, they're used as a commodity to be sold for sex and to be exploited commercially for traffickers and brothel keepers, who are also technically traffickers. Anyone who is taking a human body and exploiting it and using it and making profit off of it. And that is the definition of trafficking. And there's no movement required either. There doesn't have to be crossing borders for it to be trafficking. In some ways, trafficking is a bit of a misnomer for this crime. And trafficking can happen in someone's home. It can happen when there are a large percentage of kids who are being exploited online, who are actually being exploited by their parents. The parents are the traffickers. But that other 4 million is actually a category called state-sanctioned trafficking. And state-sanctioned trafficking is when a government is actually the trafficker. And this is something that has come into much greater focus, really even in just this past year. The United States State Department, when they put out their 2020 Trafficking in Persons report, they identified 10 countries around the world where the government itself is not only condoning trafficking, but is actually even also participating, that they themselves are profiting from the abuse and exploitation and forced labor and sexual exploitation of their own citizens or people who are within their own borders. And so I just think that's helpful to get a sketch of what trafficking looks like right now, and this breakdowns, and particularly wanted to highlight that issue of how we're seeing governments as traffickers as well right now. But back to your other question, Tommy, you were asking about progress.
Yep, progress made.
Yeah, I'll just highlight one thing just to keep the conversation flowing, and we can bounce back and forth on this. But the first thing that comes to mind for me is the number of truly excellent organizations that have risen up in the past 20 years, and even in the past 10 years, and not number and volume, but like organizations that have become established and have gone deep into this issue and have decided that they're going to stay in this. And I think right now with the pandemic in particular, we're realizing the vulnerability of nonprofit organizations. The first thing to go when things got rough economically and when things were shutting down at the beginning of this pandemic was the first thing to go is money to fund nonprofit organizations. But nonprofits like A21 are on the front lines, and they are the ones who are interfacing directly with victims of human trafficking, with law enforcement. They're the ones providing care, and we need to figure out how to help them stay in that, how to keep the resources and funding flowing to them so that they can continue to stay over the long haul and to actually provide that really tangible service. And what I've been seeing in the realm of partnership, so is, I think in some of the early days of the trafficking movement, we saw some competition really between organizations as they started to develop, and everyone had their own take on how to work on this issue. And of course that's still at play to some degree, but I think more than ever we're starting to see, just like Christian was mentioning earlier, real partnership start to happen across organizations, and organizations working with government entities as well. And certainly, I think the very best anti-trafficking organizations are the ones who are working directly with law enforcement and to attack the problem from the source, and who are also working really diligently to train and equip social workers and care providers for after survivors have been rescued. And so that, I think, the just excellence of people rising up and committing to stay over the long haul and committing to work on it together to find solutions rather than in silos. That's a huge sign of progress.
You got it, Bethany. Hey, Christian, let me ask you a quick question. She mentioned a lot of times when people think of human trafficking, immediately your mind goes to somewhere like Asia, where a lot of it is taking place. We see that in Cambodia. We see that in Thailand as well, too. As you travel around the world, where are some of those hot spots? Do you see a lot of those situations in US? Do you see it in Europe? Do you see it in Russia or Asia or Africa? Or is it across everywhere? What were some of your feedback on that?
Yes, where do you start with that? I mean, the reality is it is everywhere. And I think just focusing on the US for a moment, there used to be this sort of notion that perhaps it isn't in the backyard, whether it be my country in the UK or the US. And I think people are beginning to realize that's actually probably not the case, as people are becoming more aware, which is really powerful. But no, I've seen some horrendous. We as A21 have seen some horrendous cases in the US, in the UK. It's been predominantly for many years. It's been hidden, and it's only through the work of NGOs and actually some of the government agencies that people are beginning to see this now. They're beginning to be aware that perhaps what is hidden is in fact in plain sight, a phrase that we use a lot now. And I think, because people are starting to see it, they're starting to see things in their own community and their own neighborhoods. And I think, everyone has this sort of innate sense of suspicion that when something isn't right, if you see something and it just doesn't feel right, chances are it isn't. And I think that the shift has been through all of the activities of NGOs around the world to create awareness, is that people are actually tapping into that well, that doesn't look right in my community. That lady who brings out the trash once a week in New York, in my apartment, doesn't look happy. Something's not right there. I only see her when she brings out the trash. Oh, and then the other day she had a black eye. The kind of things that perhaps you may turn a blind eye to, but that, you know, very, very often you see domestic servitude, you know, right on your doorstep. It doesn't matter where you are. And we have seen a massive increase in calls and reports from everyday people who have just got an inkling that something's not right, and are seeing it in the neighborhood. And it's not Asia, and yes, it is in Asia, but it's not just those countries. It's literally everywhere. I don't think there is someone told me Iceland, they haven't had any cases, but I mean, I don't even know if that's true, but we've seen it everywhere, literally everywhere.
Got it. Hey, Bethany, a question came in from someone as a follow-up. They said, you mentioned that some people are profiting during COVID-19. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'll just get back to that, just the core point that traffickers are, they're innovative. Unfortunately, they are constantly trying to figure out how to maximize their profit and how to make the most out of any given situation, and to go after people and exploit them. And in COVID-19, with so many children learning at home, I'd love to hear Christian talk to this, because I know that Christians and A21 have been partnering really closely on this issue in particular, but data still has to be verified over time. The pandemic is still relatively new, but it's quite clear that there's a real surge in the amount of videos and images that are being put online of children, and of children being exploited directly. It was already happening before the pandemic, but a direct increase during the pandemic. And there's just an incredible vulnerability to children who are no longer able to be in school or have the attention, or to be seen by their teachers and administrators who care for them and see them. And they live in vulnerable homes, and their homes already weren't safe, and now they are only at home, and they're vulnerable, like I said before, about parents and family members or close friends of family who are in far greater numbers than we would ever like to admit, who are themselves the traffickers, but also predators who are coming in through gaming platforms or social media, who are seeking out children who are vulnerable. And we're just seeing a real, very significant surge in this problem. I'll turn it over to Christian.
Yeah, really, really good point. I mean, we've, two things on that off the back of what Bethany's just said. I mean, we used to think of the playground as a place where we should protect our kids, a physical place, but really the digital playground is the battlefield now. And to illustrate that, there are so many things we could talk about, but we produced a video that people can watch actually on a21.org/can you see me. If you click on the US and then click on online enticement, you'll get the video there where you can watch it, where we've recreated a story. But in essence, that story was a true story. It was actually a 12-year-old boy, and he'd been gaming online, met a friend, and he thought was a 13-year-old girl, and turned out to be a 40-year-old man. And to cut a long story short, they within a game you have these privileges and hacks where you can get to the next level, right? And so the friend who is actually enticing this little boy said, look, I'll give you a cheat and hack to get to the next level, just take your top off. Something fairly innocuous. Of course, 12-year-old brain thinks, oh, okay, I can do that. Takes his clothes off, his top off, gets the cheat and hack. You know where I'm going with this. Well, I'll give you the next cheat and hack, but can you take your trousers off and your underwear? Which he then does, and it escalates to the point where it becomes indecent, really indecent. And in this case, this little boy was told by this perpetrator to get his little sister in the room, who was 8 years old, undress her and perform sexual acts on her. He said no. And then the perpetrator revealed himself, showed all the images that he had collected of him, and said, if you don't do it, I'm going to put it on social media, and your family are going to find out. So he's eliciting control over this little boy. The little boy jumped off the balcony and killed himself. And that was the reality, right? And then when the police followed the line of inquiry, that perpetrator, it was actually two accomplices, both in their 40s. They had done this to 175 other little children in the UK. And here's the thing: when the police knocked on the door of all the parents to tell them, none of the parents knew. So the work that these people do to our kids on the digital battlefield, the playground, is unbelievable. The way that they can entice these kids, coerce them to silence, and then abuse them perpetually. Now, to your point about COVID and the lockdown, etc., of course, young kids were online before, but as Bethany said, they're all online all the time now. And so are the perpetrators. And we don't, as Bethany said, we don't have all the full picture yet, but just some evidence of the increase would be, I guess, ICAC you would normally have, and I don't quote me on these numbers, but roughly they have about 1,600 to 2,000 cases per year. Up to this point in time, they have over 6,000 cases that all relate to these kind of incidences. And the hotline, NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the US, their calls went up by 90%. We're yet to see what that leads to. But anyway, it gives you a bit of a picture. You know, we're dealing with a battlefield that really needs some strong attention, and it needs strong attention not only from parents and teachers to put greater controls and measures in place to protect their children, but we also need to get on side with the children, be a voice, be people that they can trust, and tell them what's happening to prevent it from happening in the first place. Not to mention, big tech needs to be getting involved in this. And it doesn't help when you've got sort of issues in the European Union where we're trying to block privacy, and in doing so are blocking all attempts to like photo DNA and hashtags are being stopped in Europe. I'm hoping that we manage to intercept this with the work of NCMEC, the National Center. But no, I mean, it's actually not only is it getting worse, it's about to get even worse by people putting in privacy measures so that we can't check to see where all these images are coming from, what these perpetrators are doing. No, we have a very, very serious problem on our hands.
Sorry about that. And Bethany, a lot of times another person wrote back to me and says, okay, I hear what Bethany is saying. I hear what Christian is saying. Wow, I'm so discouraged. Well, is there hope to this? I mean, is there progress being made to this, especially as the digital platform continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, or is it just completely going out of control? What is the answer to all this?
You want me to answer that? It's a tough one. It's a really tough one, right? Because I think there is a holistic approach, obviously. But the thing that I have found to be the most useful, I care about prevention more than anything. For some reason, it doesn't have the same gravitas as intervention. But I think prevention comes when people are educated. And I think, I really, really think, although it sounds discouraging, and I don't blame anyone for thinking that, we are taking ground. You know, we are getting materials out there. Parents are actually starting to take action. There are more calls to the hotlines than ever before all over the world. People are talking about it in schools. Kids are talking to each other about it. And yes, we have a lot to do, but we can't stop talking about it. We can't put a wall up like we used to. And by the way, it's taken a good 10 years to bring some of those walls down. And those walls go up because it's hopelessness. You think there's no way in which you can attack the problem. But actually you can. And I think if people are aware that they actually take the time to be educated, they become part of the solution by reporting. Reporting is so important, but also about teaching your children and for just keeping your eyes open and being part of that solution. I think it's enormously hopeful. You know, if I just on the back of the other question about, you know, advancements, if you don't mind. I mean, when I first went to Thailand and I went into an investigation, they brought me into a room. We were doing a concert at the King's. We were supposed to be doing a concert. It didn't happen. They brought me into an investigation, and 6 police officers were sitting around the table, and they brought in a little 5-year-old boy, a beautiful little boy, and they made him tell me his story. I didn't ask to hear his story, but they made him recount and recall everything that happened to him, and he burst into tears. And I won't even say, he recounted things that are just mind-blowing, that a 5-year-old boy would have to go through that kind of stuff. And at the time, I thought, my goodness, there's no hope. Even I was like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? We've got kids being brought out as trophies to talk about their stories. And 10 years on from that, having things like the CAC, where we're able to intervene and we're able to actually take care of that child, and not only us. I'm not just saying it's A21. There are other great organizations as well. Where back then, 10 years ago, there was zero child trafficking convictions. Today, I can say there are hundreds, more than hundreds. There have been thousands, and not just low-ranking officers or mama sons. Mama son is a person who runs a brothel, but we're talking about governors of entire regions being put on trial, senior police officers put in jail for hundreds of years, and that's 10 years. So if we can do that in 10 years, where we can actually be a true advocate for the child in Thailand and kept all over Southeast Asia, think what we can do in another 10 years, if we keep pushing the education, we keep making people aware, and we keep building these facilities that are much needed to come alongside law enforcement and the government. I tell you, there's an awful lot that can happen in 10 years, and I'm a testament of seeing that with my own eyes.
Hey, Bethany, Christian, let me actually ask you this question. For quite some time, hey, how are you? Give me 1 minute here. For quite some time, American Christians jumped on the overseas orphanage bandwagon, sending large amounts of money to these homes. And this person writes that she saw that the abuse in orphanages in the Philippines, which were involved in human trafficking, and they weren't able to prove and do anything about these cases. Can any of you guys both talk about some of the abuse and some of the trafficking that you see, and also orphanages that you guys have worked with or encountered?
I can. I mean, I don't know how much detail I'm going into it, but I mean, first of all, to acknowledge the point, I'm afraid it is true, and the institutionalized model of care is a very precarious model, one that we have done our best to avoid. That's not to say that all orphanages are bad. Some are great, some are absolutely fantastic, and they're run by amazing people with integrity and do a phenomenal job. And in some cases, they are very necessary to have them. There is no shortage of orphanages in Southeast Asia, we have noted, and so and because of the volume of them, I think this is the easiest way to get money out of people, and you have to be very vigilant when you give money to an orphanage. I've even had people just recently in Uganda approach me to help their orphanage, and I was a bit suspicious, so they didn't know who I was. So I sent in a police officer, and sure enough, they were crooks, and had them all arrested. But you just have to be vigilant. You have to have references. You have to know who you're dealing with, and I think we just need to be eyes wide open with anything we give money to. We need to do our due diligence and pay special attention to these kind of operations. But I must stress and underscore that there are some tremendous orphanages, and we can, if there is orphanages that people want to support, we know of great ones all over the world, so we'd be happy to help. But yes, we must be very vigilant. Does that answer the question? I think I understood what you said.
It does. And for some of you guys who are, everyone here on this call are funders as well too. Bethany, I'm not sure if you have thoughts on this one, but I think as donors as well too, whether it's people of wealth, churches, institutions, family foundations, everything like that, there is so much money that's being misspent. I've been to Jakarta so many different times, and there are so many different orphanages in Southeast Asia, as Christian said. But I've even encountered different people who will pay money to kids to become orphans just to get the American money. And for them, if you ask them, wait, why are you doing this? They actually will tell you hey, we're doing this because we have to survive or we have to make money. And you Americans give money to these orphans and we're just telling you what you want to hear to get us money. They don't see anything wrong with it in some of those things because they said we're starving, we're struggling, and so as a result, we do all those different things to be able to do it. So we just have to be smarter with our money because many of you who are here on this call, you're on this call because you're very generous, not only with your time, but with your money, but with that, give your checks and balances. I see my friend Tamara on this thing is, I've realized that you've got to work with local, younger, or local business leaders, many of them who are not dependent on your money, to help them and allow them to be your checks and balances as well too. Bethany, any other thoughts before I ask you a separate question?
Yeah, just to say that I think to work with well-established organizations that have been in this for a while and have earned credibility for the approach that they're taking to the problem that you're trying to solve, and to know that the best organizations they are working on the ground with other smaller organizations that they have vetted. So you don't need to feel like, I don't want to certainly there are organizations that are small and need us to give them a chance, but especially if it's in a different part of the world and you're not familiar with that country or the way the government works or how to report, work with a well-established organization in that country that is going to be doing the vetting themselves on these smaller partners that they're going to be working with to get their work done, if that makes sense. And so just to make sure you're, I think it's always helpful for us to realize the limits of our own understanding and to have a humble approach. Sometimes we look at these big problems of the world and we want to be the hero, honestly. We might not say that to ourselves, but often the solution that we're really looking for is like the one that makes us feel closest to the problem. Like we're really the linchpin, like we're the one who did it. And yes, there is some narcissism in that. And I think all of us can fall prey to that. And but the antidote is humility and looking for well-established partners who are also approaching this work from a posture of humility and a partnership, and to realize there are really limits to what any one of us can do, but to make sure we're constantly sharpening ourselves in connection with others.
At the Christian, we actually have a time, but I want to squeeze in two more different questions, and I want to then introduce Gary Goes to you guys. Is one person, right? How do we, and Bethany or Christian, feel free to answer this, how do we more deeply engage the business community to address the, understand and address, especially as we talk about supply chain and human trafficking? Let me read this again. How do we more deeply engage the business community to understand and address as we look at supply chain and human trafficking?
Would you like to go first, Bethany?
I was going to see if you want to jump on it. I just want to affirm what an important question this is. I think it is, we're in some ways, I think, on a frontier when it comes to figuring out this issue of supply chains. I think for a number of years, we would say to ourselves, well, it's not really possible to trace the path of how a product was made. It's just too complicated. But more than ever, I think we're at a state of realizing that so many of the products that we consume, and us as some of the wealthiest 1% of the world, we're the ones creating the demand for these products, and they're being truly made by people who are enslaved, people who are being exploited for their labor. And we need to figure out this problem. And there are governments who are starting to work on it, and there are businesses who are starting to work on it, but we need a rallying cry for more of it, and for business and government partnership to work on the problem together, particularly in the countries where there are over 4 million people, like we talked about before, people who are actually being trafficked by their own government. That's the hardest nut to crack, so to speak, is to figure out in countries where the government themselves is sanctioning, the state sanctioned forced labor. They're sanctioning the exploitation of their own people for the for making goods and products that all of us use every day. We need to get in on that and figure out how to solve it together.
Christian, I actually want to ask you two things, and in some senses, we wrap up with time. One, and I'll follow up with the follow-up question. As younger adults become increasingly passionate about social issues, what work can be done to equip these young leaders to think of innovative ways to address the issues of human trafficking?
It really comes back to the point earlier. I think first of all, they have to spend time to educate themselves and educate the people around them, because I think with education brings a greater degree of understanding of how you can be innovative. There are always innovative ways in which one can use their business in a friendly way that not only helps us intervene on behalf of others, but prevents trafficking in the first place. But I truly believe, and I know I said this before, I think it starts with education and educating themselves. We have a section on our website. There's probably plenty of other things that Bethany may point people to, but a21.org/education. There's some helpful stuff in there. It's just a starting place. As I say, I think understanding what trafficking looks like, the internet and media and the way of getting messaging in front of people is hugely useful to charities. We don't necessarily have the dollar to advertise and to tell people to educate them. And I think, when it comes to young leaders innovating, I think working with someone like us or IJM or other great charities out there who are doing good stuff, I think getting around a table and looking at the problem, educating yourself is the means and the way you would calculate an innovative idea. Honestly, organizations like us and IGM, we already have ideas that we want to innovate, that if we had the finances and the resources available to us, we could do it, and we could make a huge difference. So I would say, step number one, take some time to educate yourself about the issue and people around you. Bring the experts who are dealing with this around the table and brainstorm of what you can bring and how you can innovate together. Because quite often people say to me, "Oh, what can I do, Christian?" I don't know, because I don't know you very well, but I would love to spend time with you, and maybe we could brainstorm a specific idea that relates to your business, to relates to your world, and come up with something genius that's actually, really impactful. Every time I've done that, every single time, there's always been a tremendous result. But it takes the time, it takes the effort, and we need to unpack what it is that you're interested in, what your reach is, what you're doing, and what we do, and how we can offer our lens into the problem. Does that sort of half answer the question, doesn't it? It's not an easy one, I'm afraid.
It does, Christian. And as I look at some of the people who are on this call, I recognize some of the names. Each one of you guys have certain skills. Each one of you have certain gifts that you bring, or certain passions that you have been gifted in. How do you use that, especially in your jobs, whether it's in branding? Some of you guys have it. Some of you guys are running nonprofits. Some of you guys have media companies, all of that stuff. How do you use those skills to really be able to engage and do good? And so, Christian, before I bring in Braden Gogus in, talk a little bit about freedom centers, and then it ties in with what I want Braden to share about.
Yeah, sure. Well, the freedom centers are very important. As I was saying earlier, we don't go for the institutionalized care model, but we want to get people on a path of independence. And so the early idea was that we would take a facility in a city or outside of a city. Let's take Sofia, for example, in Bulgaria, where we do have one. We have another one in South Africa and other places, in Greece. But we'd have a freedom center in a location, and within that 10-mile radius, we would have key critical services identified, and then the freedom center becomes a hub where people can come and learn new skills, where they can go through the rehabilitation process, working with therapists, working and learning new skills, which are really important. Quite often, learning very basic skills of how to get through life. Really simple stuff that we need to arm people with, and the Freedom Center would exist in a location where someone who's been intervened for, or we might be putting under a witness protection program, would be living close by. So there's easy access to the Freedom Center, but equally, as part of that, they can leave and they can go home to their own place, their own solace, and not be continually reminded that they're a trafficked victim by being around other victims of trafficking. I think the whole purpose and the whole pursuit is to build life skills to help restore them back to some kind of normality. Though they may continue to have the scars, they should be able to live and exist and be able to produce things that all of us take for granted, which basically means that they have independence. And of course, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is ensuring that these wonderful people that we call survivors are not re-trafficked. And that really is a very, very important aspect, because quite often they're very vulnerable to that. And so we have to be their guard, and we have to be their right hand to avoid such a vulnerability, heaven forbid, ever happening. And as I say, lead them on the road to independence.
You got it. Hey, with that said, we were just talking about what young people can do to really be able to engage the fight against trafficking. And Braden, I'm going to bring you in as well, too. I know you're just coming in from swim practice, Braden. There he is. Hey, Braden.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Hey, a lot of times we were talking about creative ways that young people could really be able to fight trafficking. And this is 17-year-old Braden from Indianapolis. And so he started coding and playing around with coding and developing mobile games at age 9. And he really developed a love for that. And so at age 17 now, he really wanted to really address this issue of trafficking, created a mobile game, and is using that mobile game to really be able to fund the work of trafficking at age 21 called Solid Square. And so talk to me, Brady, about Solid Square.
So Solid Square was a game that I had made before I knew about A21, as the organization. I knew about the issue a little bit just from my dad used to work with other companies like Buy2B, CGI that did similar work with human trafficking. And so I kind of knew about that issue, but not A21. And so what I have done with Solid Square is it's a card game that already existed, where part of the draw of the game is that you're going to be you unlock decks as you play different artistically designed decks. And so starting on Giving Tuesday and going through, I don't really have an end date set. We said for the month of December, but I could leave it up as long as I need to. We've added 2 decks that are basically A21 themed, that all the rest of the games all the rest of the decks in the game you can unlock without paying money, but these are donation decks basically. So it's we have a 99-cent one and a $5 one, that if you buy them, all the money will go to A21, and then you get to unlock this cool design deck that helps people. So that was fun.
Amazing.
You got it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah, and Braden, just for people to know, because you're 17 years old, you're on the swim team, you have you have high school, you're thinking about going to college. What made you at age 9 start tinkering around playing with mobile games?
It just felt natural, the next thing to do, because I had always loved making games. Other games, whenever we would play board games, I'd always change the rules. I wanted to make it more fun or whatever. Candyland gets old after you've played it 20 times. Let's change it and make it different. So that was kind of where that came from. And then that would turn into me drawing on pieces of lined loose leaf paper, drawing and cutting them out to make game pieces. And so it was I'd always been making games as long as I can remember. And so it was I had a little iPod Touch that I would play games on, and I was wouldn't it be cool if I could make a game that I could play on this? And so it was why don't I literally Google searched how to make a game. So that was how that started.
You got it. Well, hey, guys, and you could download Solid Square. It's SOLISQUARE. That's Solid Square. And so you could download that game wherever anywhere on your phone as well, too, in the app section. So, cool. Braden, thank you so much. I know you're just coming back from a swim meet. Did you do well, Braden?
Yes, I did.
Thank you very much. And Christian, Bethany, thank you so much. Hey, just for me, I think a lot of times as we wrap up, a lot of times is 821, the whole idea of human trafficking was something I've known Bethany for a long time, known Bill and all that stuff. And oh yeah, human trafficking is important. It wasn't until I actually went to Cambodia and Thailand and started seeing all of this stuff, not with just sexual trafficking, but everything that was affecting kids. And for me, that meant a lot to me. Just because I have a 1.5-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old daughter, I'm sitting there as a dad, I could never allow this to happen. What in the world is going on that allows individuals to do that to little kids? And we have to address it. And that's why a lot of times for me, it's been so important for me to host these events in light of the Christmas season. We're giving gifts, everything like that, especially in this COVID season. People need help. And if you are in a position to even financially give and support, I personally am a supporter of 821 or other like-minded organization. Let's do that to really be able to fight human trafficking as well too, because there are people out there who are not blessed like us, sitting here in my nice house in front of my laptop talking about human trafficking. There are people from 3-year-olds to 4-year-olds to 5-year-olds every day being sent out to their parents to really be able to address it. And so we got to be able to help out in some way as well too. And so Bethany, Christian, I'm going to give you some last final thoughts as we wrap up. I'm going to start with you, Bethany.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, I mean, from the very beginning, when I first started working on this, people have come up to me and they always want to know, like Christian said, what can I do? And they usually give a caveat of what can I do besides give money? And but I don't know if I've ever felt the need to say this more boldly than I do now. It really matters. Like, giving of your resources matters so critically. It matters now more than ever to give it to the right places, to the organizations who have committed and who have proven themselves and have proven that they're in this for the long haul. It really, really matters that we give. And it also, I think, giving puts our imagination on the right track to move towards hope. Because certainly awareness is so important, and it can be overwhelming. Like the listener who asked the question about, what do we do? This is really crushing. It is, but there actually is incredible hope to be found in this work. And the more aware you become of the evil that's at work, there's also opportunity, all the more to know of the good that is happening, and to know that there really is incredible hope, to get those stories in front of your eyes. And I think 821, the work that Christian's doing in particular, he hasn't told you this, but he does really beautiful work. And if you go and watch some of the videos that 821 has put together, that Christian has ideated and produced, it will get your heart and your imagination working in the direction of hope to see what's possible, because there really is just incredible progress and rescue happening every single day, and we need more of it. And the way we can do more of it is through the commitment of resources from every single person who is finding about this issue to give what they can and to get engaged. And you'll find out, quote unquote, what else you can do along the way, for sure. But I think honestly, giving is such a critical entry point.
You got it. Christian, wrap us up as we wrap up here.
Yeah, amazing. Well, look, I mean, I'm really just echoing what you guys have already said. You're absolutely, I couldn't agree more. But I think, Braden, my man, you're the gold standard. I mean, this is what it's all about. If people could be like you, my friend,
yeah,
and take the initiative and be super innovative. I mean, goodness me, 10 years from now, we're going to clean up, I'm telling you. So Braden, thank you. And just super congratulations with everything you've done. We certainly appreciate it. But I think no better way to wrap up than to take your example of taking this initiative. And honestly, guys, if we can all be that innovative and care, don't underestimate what you can do. Don't underestimate what you have in your hand, what you have within the realm of your circle of influence, of your skill set. whatever you have, use what you can and be innovative with it. And also reach out to us and others who work in this space, and bounce ideas off of us, and we'll gladly be there to meet you and to talk with you and help you through it. So yeah, I just want to say last word, Braden, thank you very much. Gold standard. Let's be innovative, and I think we can do an awful lot 10 years from now.
Thank you. And Braden, I think a lot of times I have behalf of everyone over here, a lot of times is, I bet you everyone here is a little bit older than you. You have a certain gift and you steward that gift well and continue to make a difference in this world. And I hope all of us here in our own sphere, in our own way, will steward that gift well. And so happy holidays. Thank you so much, Christian. Good afternoon, Bethany. Have a good morning. The rest of you have a wonderful morning, and happy holidays to you. We'll talk soon.